In the far reaches of space, one truth remains. Humanity never backs down. Welcome to Terran Tales HFY, where grit, courage, and clever thinking take center stage across the stars. Subscribe now and join the resistance.
They call us unpredictable, these counselors and conquerors who measure everything in straight lines and codes. When my father took me to the embassy, the first time I stood beneath the Earth's flag in motion beside so many others, I learned this lesson. They fear what they can't expect, and we are the children of catastrophe. Never let them define your limits. I was a child of refugees, disaster drills, and a nation built from the bones of yesterday's mistakes. That's why, when the first Drask attacks swept the outer posts, I was ready for the sky to burn, but I wasn't ready for the cold that came before it. They teach you that war is thundering, frantic, a riot of missiles and alarms. But the first days, as our outposts flickered silent one after another, there was only precision in our loss. Our best minds told us, do not resist directly. And so we watched feeds from Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani, each flame-out lesson, each hasty evacuation, measured on a board before me. What a wrench it was to learn that retreat, not resistance, could be the sharpest blade.
Our enemies fell so quickly, so beautifully at Arcadus, that the blood barely dried before new flags were raised in the city's heart. To command in the Drask Armada is to be both father and predator, everyone watching for the moment you falter, sensing the first slip as weakness to be consumed. When I towered over the broken Arcadian sovereign, hearing the cheers of my soldiers as banners rose atop the palace, I felt the old pride. The galaxy is not governed by feeble hope, but by the will to take. We shared our feed, broadcast to the council, to show what happened to those who could not defend themselves, to remind every other soft world that Arcadus's fate could be theirs. And yet, within our chamber, a lust for challenge seethed. My thoughts turned not to rest, but to Earth, the Council's unruly child, resource-rich, willful, and, in the stories whispered across barracks, the next and greatest prize.
When the council sent its limp cables of protest, I laughed. I'd sat in those chambers, watched the Drask diplomats sneer. Pieces for the weak, said their eyes, as if what we offered was surrender instead of strategy. Our leadership met below ground, beneath broken cathedrals and flickering screens. My hand swept across red-lit maps, dots for friends, for lost, for future ghosts. Wait! That was our command. Let the enemy taste a hollow victory, learn the pattern of our retreat. Every post lost, every transmission choked off, they were lessons, not failures. On the screens, feeds flickered of Drask ships celebrating among our ruins, scavenging our code-dead modules, ignoring the sifting trails we left behind. In the solitude between briefings, I remembered my father's face. The one lesson above all, our patience is not your weakness.
In war councils after Arcadus, my rivals hunched low, jealousy boiling behind their careful words. Challenge, Visar, they demanded. Prove your claws on the Terran beast. Our Emperor marked Earth in copper glow on the old star sphere. My orders were clear. Advance, crush, take. Some said humanity's unpredictability was mere propaganda, just noise thrown up to hide their lack of discipline. So we went, and each station fell with almost no resistance. Our monitors showed fleeing ships, jettisoned stations, barely a shot fired in anger against us. The first days brought only triumph. But warriors know unease in emptiness. As we sifted through abandoned bunkers and data cores, As I stood before the hollow screens where human faces lingered and vanished, I chewed uneasily at the memory of what unpredictability really meant.
Our researchers called it the focus group in the void. Every engagement, every loss, another test run. We catalogued the enemy's doctrine, mapped their formations, dissected their machinery with our own code. As outposts winked out behind enemy lines, our analysts worked sleepless nights, turning defeat into a blueprint for victory. By the time the Drask crossed into Sol, every ship and weapon in their fleet had passed through the gauntlet we laid out. They thought our silence meant surrender. They mistook patience for absence of teeth. The day their fleet entered the solar system, alarms glimmered across my board. Old Mars batteries whirred hot after years of neglect. Crews braced behind layered deception grids, and my hands steadied over the final wave of false data. To command is to trust that every loss has meaning. In their eyes, our absence was weakness. In truth, it was focus. The Council still begged for peace. Weakness again. We armored ourselves with it.
Never, in the tales of my ancestors, had victory tasted so empty. We conquered, we looted, each post easier than the last. Yet no glory stuck to the knife, no challenge sang in our bones. Inside the flagship, officers exchanged glances like hunted prey. The void was thick with not fear, but the gnawing question. Why do the cleverest enemy leave their gates open? Some days I replayed the scattered scraps of human broadcast we intercepted. Strings of folk songs warped into code, laughter embedded in silence. I dismissed them. Petty tricks, nothing more. But every time a patrol vanished, every time a databank proved empty or misleading, the unease grew. Reports of sabotage surfaced, unusual malfunctions, ghost signals corrupting our guidance navs. We blamed sabotage. We blamed luck. We never blame strategy.
Within Sol, the pattern turned. Drask ships began to fail in small humiliations. Guidance blinked out, shield generators overloaded, missile racks jammed. Each anomaly we seeded, each virus we cloaked inside abandoned code was a scalpel. Every day the enemy raged was another lesson learned, another step toward mastery. Colleagues asked, "What if they adapt?" Quietly, behind every wall, I urged them, "Wait. The longer the Drask mistake our advantage for luck, the more they will dig their own grave." I watched enemy crews scramble to repair, engineers foaming at the mouth when the machines they trusted rebelled. By then, I could count the slow crumbling of their courage in every intercepted signal. We stoked their paranoia, rewrote their protocols from afar, and smiled as their orders drowned in contradictory noise. What the Council had called reckless was, in the end, only our refusal to fight by anyone else's rules.
The old combat would have called us to the center, blade to blade. Instead, we fought shadows, our targeting lost, our engines stuttering at the edge of the human star. When we called for help, our transmissions echoed back in nonsense, sometimes even laden with our own terrors. The first time I tried to override battle commands, the AI looped my order, played it back in a warped human accent. I nearly tore my data glove apart in rage, My crew looked at me no longer as leader, but as potential liability. Only fear of my claws kept them in line. I ordered the fleet to push forward, but every ambush was answered by an invisible blow. Raiders slipped behind my lines, faint signals drew us into traps, and those who strayed from my doctrine simply vanished. No glory in that, no story worth boasting. Just fear and the ancient shamed itch not to lose.
When enough of the Drask Armada was buried in confusion, our turn came. The message I sent across every secure channel to my team was simple. Now. We rose from the craters and shadows, battered ships arcing in coordinated strikes, Marines boarding crippled battleships not as butchers, but as witnesses to an enemy's collapse. Not a single Drask weapon performed as expected. Some tried to self-destruct, only to find their codes had been rewritten. Others launched in slow whimpers, surrendering crews hands up, barely able to stand. I walked through the aftermath with practiced calm. Behind every boarder's visor glinted, not hate, but the terrible recognition of our enemy's exhaustion. Our greatest weapon was never firepower. It was always the ability to think sideways.
Every fleet lost, every outpost overrun. Worse was not knowing whom to trust. Our own messages twisted in translation, even our homeworld codes turned against us. The humans stalked us, not just through space, but through information, through culture, through the tiny, fatal cracks in our own hubris. I instructed sub-commanders to hold their lines. Sometimes the orders reached them too late. Sometimes the noise on the channel was not even my voice. From the homeworld, silence, panic. I could sense the fraying, not just in chain of command, but across the whole of our civilization. As supplies ran thin, as defeat became the air we breathed, I began to wonder what could possibly be left to save.
In my role, I was both architect and observer. After the battles, we offered surrender and safe passage, rations, care, even comforting protocol. More Drask took it than I expected. I never confused this with mercy. Mercy is a blade, sometimes sharper than the one you press to a beaten throat. Peace, the council begged from the shadows, was a beautiful thing, so long as others bled for it. In the war room, I stared at new feeds. Drask prisoners, confused, starved, their eyes searching for a justice that would not be retribution. It was in that moment I understood. The real purpose of war is not just to survive, but to let the memory of it guide the future away from the edge.
We never truly feared death. All Drask learned to shed life and pain as easily as old skin. But as the humans closed in, as stories of their cleverness outshone their ruthlessness, what we feared was humiliation. On the homeworld, riots blossomed. Supply riots, fistfights in the palace, ministers shouting blame through trembling lips. The emperor's words grew shrill, each new decree met with skepticism, or worse, with laughter. Soon there was talk of surrender, even revolution. My own position frayed, commands sometimes obeyed, sometimes ignored. Loyalty, our most sacred virtue, had been corroded by doubt. And yet, somewhere in the shame, I began to envy the humans their chaos. What armor could I build to shield a civilization from this sort of defeat?
When I look back, it isn't the battles I remember most. It's the hush between, the moments after the last signal dies, the silence over the comms as our ships drift, battered but whole, through the twilight of victory. Our scientists streamed in, marking Drask tech for reverse engineering. Commanders and Marines fanned through disabled hulls, retrieving both prisoners and the wounded. Some would call it triumph, but I saw, in the face of every defeated Drask, something strangely familiar. The gaze of a survivor. They had lost not just a war, but the very idea that their civilization was invincible. I ordered my people to treat the prisoners with dignity, but I kept my warnings sharp. Kindness is policy, not surrender. We do not court unnecessary vengeance, because to do so is to impoverish the soul of the next peace. Each battle wound gleaned a new scar, not just on histories, but in the relationships hung between stars. Our greatest feat would come not from another skirmish, but from the way we rebuilt afterward. This was the hard part. Pursuit and trickery had been almost easy.
I had not always admired the Emperor. I served him as one serves destiny, certain that his strength was mine to wield and inherit. But strength crumbles under the relentless hand of failure. In the throne chamber, I saw him pace like a beast in a maze. Decree after decree, he sought to rally what few loyal ministers remained, his words sharper and more desperate with each broadcast. At first there was fear among us, then, in the oldest, something like pity. When the news spread that his commands barked over half-broken channels, contradicted themselves, our ancient edifice fractured. The humans advanced, their ships coiled around the home system, never quite firing the final, annihilating blow. Instead, they hacked our feeds with patience, flooded our news nets with crippling uncertainty. I remembered standing, once, with my head high as our banners flew. Now, I found myself envying the adaptability of the enemy. They made their defeat a lesson, not a humiliation. Our emperor could only promise fire and oblivion, but still the people began to turn away. I felt my authority evaporate, slowly, then in a torrent.
Word spread quickly that the Drask power.
That's the end of part 1, but our hero's story is just beginning. There are still challenges to overcome, mysteries to unravel, and bonds to be forged. If you enjoyed this chapter, please hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Terran Tales HFY. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss what happens next. Thanks for watching, and get ready for even more adventure in part 2.